Take a handheld mic. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
Good to see you, Steve. All right, Matt. Good to see you.
Take a seat. Come and sit next to me. That's the. Yeah, well, look, it's all budge up. So there's already been quite a lot of discussion this morning about AI. It's obviously one of the hottest topics.
Everybody knew what they were getting into today.
Everybody knew what they were getting into today. It's one of the hottest topics in tech right now. I wanted to actually just start off a little bit just with sort of shameless. I couldn't be director of research without doing sort of shameless plug of some sort of Cavell research. So this comes from a study that we've just done of 800 contact center buyers across some key markets in North America, Europe, and actually in South Africa as well. So that's one of the key expansion markets they're interested in. And I wanted to start off, gents, you can't actually see this because it's impossible behind you. The data that we got back from those 800 contact center managers, that actually only 6% of them haven't deployed AI or aren't in some sort of trial and proof of concept phase. So I wanted to start first of all, are you seeing that level of uptake across your customers? And Matt, maybe we'll start with you from the PwC side. If you maybe a little intro to yourself, and then are you seeing AI uptake of that sort of level?
Yeah, thanks. So I lead our software sector for consulting, which means software vendors that are all going through the current hype cycle and all the challenges you're experiencing. I kind of work with everybody on a day-to-day basis, thinking about how we help solve those challenges. But what I like about my role is I have a dual role, and part of it is around thinking about customer experience for our end clients' customers, B2B2B or B2B2C. And I think it's a really relevant question, and I'd be interested to hear from the other panelists, but I actually think there's a bit of a bifurcation going on here. Is at the top end of the enterprise market, I would absolutely agree with that. I would say in an environment where you've had an established contact center and you've got the volume and scale, we're seeing lots of really good AI use cases come out. But in the mid-market, I would actually say that we're not seeing that high degree of penetration. And I think it's interesting to start to think about, given the amount of amazing folks outside, how we start to enable that mid-market as opposed to just going offshore and kind of giving it to a contact center offshore environment.
First of all, I think that's a really good point in terms of definitions. And our data, I haven't broken this down by business size segmentation, but our data generally shows, as you would expect, the larger business you are, the more likely you are to have deployed AI. I suppose there's also a follow-up question of, and I think Finbar touched on that briefly in his keynote, of what do you define as AI? Are we talking about transcription and summarisation as true AI? That's maybe a debate. Steve, if you wouldn't mind, a little intro to yourself, and also Five9, your ICP, up the market, maybe seeing those sort of levels of adoption.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Not turned on, am I? I shall shout.
See if we're live. Try again. Try number 5.
One work? Yeah, oh,
just on
it does work. I just wasn't talking loud enough. Yeah, so I'm Steve Blood. I work at Five9, market intelligence and evangelism. So some of you may know me. I was a Gartner analyst for 23 years, and I used to track Five9 and other vendors in this space. What was the question again? No, I'm sorry, I can remember what it is.
As soon as you said Gartner analyst, you know, there's a slight unease in the room.
I give them a hard time, but they're really, really good, believe me.
Thank you, Steve. Your check's in the post.
Thank you. I think, yeah, I mean, how do you define AI? I mean, Five9 acquired Inference more than 5 years ago, so your pillar here, this largest one here, we can absolutely buy. We agree with that. There's a lot of those more simplistic requirements, deterministic outputs, which you can do with very, very low risk, and those are being managed through, and those are delivering some value. I think transcription is standard. I guess that is an AI of some description, but what is also important, of course, is what you do with that transcription. So, you know, the insights that we're now creating in real time with things like trending analysis and all that, which is uncovering all sorts of things, which historically would have taken a long time to do with, say, speech analytics to work out all the word sets and so on. So I think from that perspective, it's really good. And then, of course, on what we're also seeing, one of the bigger areas is on the agent side. And I think the agent side is less risky, requires fewer data sets, and therefore you can pull through agent assist. Summarization is very, very important as well. So I think all of those are definitely coming through. The next biggie will be the agentic, the autonomous, and everyone's scared about that, and you know, very few companies are doing it. there's a little bit of experimentation coming through at the minute.
I think on the agentic side, one of the key things is how do you even define it, first of all, in terms of sort of workflow and automation, and what is actually AI and what is automation with automated action. Jim, from the DARPA perspective, your ICP is slightly broader across into the UCAS stack and across the CX stack.
Yep.
Do you sort of agree with those adoption figures, very widespread adoption of AI in contact centers?
I think the content or the question, how it's phrased, is exactly what everybody's been talking about. What does that mean that I use AI? Because I have Copilot that is embedded in my Excel, does that mean I use AI? Does it mean that somebody had a project, an IT manager had a project that, hey, we need to figure out how to use AI, so they use an open AI product, something along those lines, to embed that into some part of their company to understand what they're doing today. I think what's evolving, and I think the conversations that are changing, we're having more conversations with customers than ever before about what their AI platform strategy is. Are they going down the path of Google Gemini Enterprise? Are they looking at a tool from Claude? Are they looking at OpenAI? How are they going to use their own LLMs inside of that to protect their content, protect that workflows? And then to us, it's the conversations of how is that tying across the entire communications platform? MCP connections. Is everybody familiar with the MCP connection? It's like it's API for the AI world, right? That's the way that I always look at it as a telephony guy, like I said, from years back. But those MCP conversations are continuing to evolve to say, how this is the AI that we have chosen to use for some set of our workflow. How do we take and embed the rest of the collaboration platform, the contact center experience, whatever it might be, because now that becomes the front end of the tooling that they're using as well.
My next question was going to be about use cases, but I think we've already covered quite a few of them there. I suppose one of the things that Finbar talked about, and we've heard in every panel, and I've been at various industry events recently, I think that one of the most important points is how do you demonstrate return on investment? And I think I've seen various studies recently that people have deployed lots of AI, spent a lot of money on it, and actually not necessarily been able to either track that ROI. So I wanted to come to you. What use cases, features, functions do you think are easiest from a customer perspective in terms of demonstrating that ROI? Jim, I might come back to you on that. Are there clear and obvious ones that are the easiest to demonstrate that return on investment?
Yeah, I would say so, actually. So we saw the same thing on the ROI side. So we've actually created an ROI tool to be able to show and expose to customers, for them to be able to see, okay, what does that look like? What's the semblance of that tool?
So is that showing across different DARPA time saved for an agent?
Correct.
Or resolutions increased, that sort of thing?
All of the above. Yeah, all of the above is what's built into that matrix. But then it also goes down every time we've all looked at an ROI tool, is like, okay, is that my specific data? Is that a subset of what the industry looks at as a whole? And I would tell you that what drives the conversations forward from an ROI conversation is really boiling it down to simple applications inside of verticals. So we've done a lot of verticalization inside of Dialpad, from the way that we market to the way that we talk about the product as well. And the same things come up in the same subset of verticals every single time. So when you can talking about an agentic workflow inside of a healthcare company or a finance company or whatever that might be, that it relates to the way that they're doing business, and it's in their motion and it's in their nomenclature today, that simplifies the understanding to that. And now you can show it and put it forward. You can show an ROI to what that is, and that becomes the baseline of how you go forward.
So more vertical specialization, more expectation on the particular use case, and understanding of that is easier to demonstrate.
Spot on.
Matt, from the PwC side, are there easier ways to demonstrate ROI? Are there particular things that you're seeing, or is it much more customer dependent?
I mean, I think we would absolutely agree it's industry and customer dependent. But I think there's, from our perspective, there's a little bit of a fallacy here in terms of just thinking about time saved as an ROI. Because if we only talk about time saved, are we talking about the value of the activities that we enriched and the value of the time that we saved?
Also, what's being done with the time saved? I've heard a really cogent argument for that if you save 3 hours of an employee's time per week, but they spend the rest of that 3 hours at the water cooler, actually, you're not seeing that back. So, sorry, continue.
No, I mean, and I think you would immediately, in this audience, you'd immediately go to mean time to respond, mean time to resolve, call handling time, etc. And what's good about that is we can reasonably quickly quantify that. We've got all our call records. We can see how many calls Matt did on a daily basis. The real value comes in, though, is how many of those calls were resolved with a positive outcome, and how many of those calls were resolved with an NPS that positively contributed to what we're trying to achieve. Because actually, customers are now buying those experience outcomes. So what we're trying to do is go, layer one is pick the immediate volumetric kind of benefits, but layer two is where you really start to think about, did I deliver a duty of care? Did I save a contract? Did I help somebody through their process in a way that they would recommend to somebody else? That's harder to quantify from a time perspective, but better to quantify from a value perspective, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely, really key point, and my way of looking at it completely rudimentary there. If you're saving a lot of time, but actually you're not really improving the output of customer service, then you're sort of negating the whole, the premise of the approach. Anyway, Steve, from the 5-9 perspective, when you're talking to customers about demonstrating ROI, are they, I mean, I know your use cases range, massively. Are there obvious things that spring to mind that are easy to demonstrate the ROI and what that ROI is?
No.
Excellent.
Let me explain before I get fired for saying that. The ROI argument is broken, right? Because all the research surveys show that companies are not achieving ROI from their AI investments. And the problem is because, Matt just alluded to this, we're not talking about outcomes. Okay, I heard this so many times as a Gartner analyst. Finbar mentioned it this morning. The web team, the marketing team still owns the website. So they're saying, we're containing 80% of customer chats in our chatbot. And what I would hear from the people around the customer service center, we get the next call. So they're not. And so the issue here is you're not linking the metrics together to create the outcome for the customer. And so I think the best scenario that you create for moving from what is experimental into production is you get your ROI from understanding the outcome, whether it be a business outcome, whether it be a customer outcome. We saved 5 minutes a day or 5 minutes every inquiry through automated wrap-up and AI summaries. So we were able to flog the staff harder. And so 30% increase in employee attrition, your AI business case is suddenly broken. So I think the key thing for me is to be focusing on the outcomes. And yeah, it's not easy, okay? We have to drive that through to our customers sometimes because they are just saying, yeah, I can save money this way. So that for me is going to be the answer to ROI, is focusing on outcomes, not metrics.
Any of you that have sat in my panels previously, we prep a list of questions. A lot of preparatory work goes into these, and then what happens is I just go off script. So I think that's a really interesting point, though. Do you have to change? How much work are you having to do to tell customers actually you need to measure ROI in a different way? Because that's a real challenge. If they think, oh, we're going to save it, my rudimentary understanding, Matt, in terms of, oh, we're saving time, how much do you have to say, oh, well, actually, no, there's a better way of demonstrating ROI? How much is on you as the experts and the vendors to help customers understand that they need to change that measurement of ROI?
I mean, I would argue a significant amount. Traditionally, the mark of a poor consultant, maybe there's someone that we know, is answering the first question you hear, not asking why you're actually asking that question. Why are you trying to improve your call handling time? Well, it's because I've got a really big backlog. Why do you have a really big backlog? Well, it's because we've got challenges upstage in our pipeline. ROI is actually getting those resolutions better so you have less flowing through, but in how we deal with the volume, how we analyze and work through the volume, and then how we give the agents and the humans time to really spend on the complicated edge cases. And if we can build that ROI tree, we're actually helping think about revenue. We're thinking about operating profit. We're not just thinking about call handling and call volumes.
Yeah, it's that ultimate pain point. It's that identifying that ultimate outcome piece. Jim, would you agree with that? Dialpad, you're having to talk to customers about how they measure ROI, how you can help them do that in a more effective way.
It's the same conversation, right? It's managing successful interactions, managing successful outcomes. Once you can show that percentage of those interactions that are successfully managed, how they're managing it, what they're looking for, being able to predict what the next outcome that they can manage, all of those things start tying that together in that ROI story.
Sorry, but I just think that's a really interesting point, right? When we talk about where are we seeing AI and CX adopted at scale and work really well? I mean, we've been trying to do next best action forever, right? But I actually think for a change from a frontier perspective, we're in an environment where we can actually tell the agent what the next best action probably needs to be.
Yep.
And, you know, kind of if I think about the point we're making here is thinking about the overall outcomes. The overall outcome is how do I help a client get to resolution in a way that they would recommend what I've done and in a way that generates value for me, and what's the shortest path to that? So I think the opportunity we're seeing, again, in the enterprise space is really capitalizing on the front end of the analysis and the allocation and the triage, but actually providing next best actions that are usable and helpful as opposed to, oh, it's just the next logical step in the process.
Yeah.
That outcome's probably worth digging on. And Steve, you talked about a couple of them at the beginning, but what do you think of some of those most common across your larger enterprise customers? Those sort of, it's not even a feature or a function, it's an outcome ultimately that customers are trying to achieve, and where it's being deployed at scale.
Well, I think moving towards first contact resolution is probably going to
changing the metric of measurement, exactly like we were talking about before.
Well, yes, but you know, it's understanding where the customer has been through the journey, and obviously, if you can't resolve in the chat channel, then connecting them when they connect to maybe the phone channel, the context, etc., is carried through, so that resolution can then be achieved. So, I think that's first contact resolution is a big one. I think. Everyone focuses on CSAT, which I think is a little bit of a difficult metric, because what CSAT is doing is it's explaining how the employee dealt with the customer. That's a quality piece. It's not really telling you where the customer is, you know, going to be more loyal to you moving forward. And that's where I think really we should be looking at using the insights, because as everyone has said, there's all this gold, there's all this data. It's conversational data where your customers are telling you tons of stuff. This is the authentic voice of the customer. It's not prompted, it's not a survey. And that's what you can extract from there, and that can then help you define, you know, really what a level of customer satisfaction is and why, and what you should be doing next to improve on it.
Jim, any sort of particular use cases or even outcomes that you think are particularly common across the sort of Dialpad customer base?
I think our customers, just like our partners, are all learning, right? They start with basic workflows and some semblance of that, evolve to something a little bit more advanced. But the conversations that we have now is being able to get more predictive in that analysis. So we talked about successful outcomes. These are successful interactions that happen first call resolution 40% of the time. Well, what do I need to do from a predictive analysis perspective based on all of the call volume that we have, based on the history of what success looks like, to give proactive analysis to change that workflow to be able to do something different? I think that's where that conversation is headed, and giving the tools to be able to allow them to build that, to be able to predict that, that's where the conversation starts shifting to create any sort of use case around whatever type of business that they're in.
At Cavell, we've got lots of data, and I've seen lots of third-party studies, and all three of you, I know you're evangelists of the industry, you'll have seen lots of studies about the amount of AI projects that either fail or don't continue out of trial or proof of concept phase. And I think there's a definition problem of, you know, how many are in a trial phase that was never intended to go into production or to be done at scale. But I think we can agree that there's a significant amount of AI projects that stall. So I wanted to ask you, what are the sort of primary reasons that you see AI projects stall? Steve, I'm going to come to you first on that, but I did want to involve the audience as well, and I think we've managed to effectively get Slido working. So on the stage here, you should see a question, what's the biggest barrier preventing wider AI deployment in CX? We've given you a few multiple choice options. So anyone, you can scan the QR code and answer on Slido. I'd be interested for your thoughts whilst we go through the panel. So Steve, I'll start with you. Where do you see most AI projects stalling?
Well, they're built for the business, not for the customer. So if you think about the front end, companies are thinking, how can I deflect or contain customer conversations in self-service? They're not thinking about what does our customer need. So if we start from that angle, Our own research and other research has shown that customers do want to use artificial intelligence. They're very happy to use it. It gets them their answer faster than waiting for a human in some way. But you have to build for them. And it's that classic case of, well, you will get your return. You will save your money because the customer will use something that you've built for them.
So is that issue, and I think we're potentially guilty of this at Cavell, a very data-heavy company, of talking more about a business process issue rather than a customer outcome issue that we're talking about as what should be the primary focus. It's more focusing on what we think is the business issue, but actually it's underlying, it's that pain point piece.
We did a webinar last week from assumptions to insight. And there are tons and tons of assumptions that people make. And they don't use data to validate those. So they don't really know where the starting point is. They've just been told, often by us, the vendors, that you can save some money by implementing this technology. So, yeah.
And also, we've talked about a lot of that previously, that you have an anecdotal opinion within your business of where something is going wrong without actually really understanding the real data underneath it and what the actual issue is. That's a really good point. Matt, where do you see AI projects stalling, or where they have to go back to redesign? What do you see as sort of primary issues?
I mean, I think seeing the numbers up on the board, the first one that immediately comes to mind is trust. Because by nature, I think we all know enough about it, is the distinction between probabilistic and deterministic, and being in an environment where we can trust that the answer that we get is the right answer, i.e. I'm phoning in, I'm going to get an automated voice, give me my account balance. I already think there's something wrong with my account balance. Can I trust that it's correct? And arguably there's some interesting patterns around that. But actually, I would come back to, in terms of as a barrier from an organization's opportunity to move, it is often that internal skills and tooling, and that classifies down to our view of, is our data ready to do it? And I think we've been talking about data for, 20 years, as long as I've been in this career, and in 20 years' time, we'll probably still be talking about it. But I think there's a misconception that all the data has to be correct before we have the ability to make some positive impacts. And I think there's a big barrier there where we get stuck with that analysis paralysis around, if we can just fix our data. Question is, can we fix enough of it? Can we improve it over time? And can we use some tools to help us accelerate through that? And then the next question is, do we have the internal capacity, A, from a people, but B, from a maturity of thought, in terms of, are we making the right decisions about what we're trying to do next, but balancing what our customer expectations and the customer experience is going to be? So it's a complicated answer, but I think, when we get to the point that we can trust that we get the same answer every single time, it gives us hope and faith that at least we can move to the next step. And that relies on, is the data correct? And is enough of the data correct? And then are we picking something that gives us what we need from a business perspective today, but also gives it that pathway to grow? Because, I suppose my final point on this is, how many times as an organization do you have the opportunity to re-hardwire a contact center or part of it into your business? You don't have the ability to do that every year.
And what's the
How do you
cost
get it
of
right?
doing that?
Right.
And exactly, what's the cost of doing that? So I think those are all things that are important to balance when you're in it. The one thing I would do, though, is having a North Star, not trying to boil the ocean and get to the North Star as kind of step number one is another barrier that we see, but also being bold enough to make a move and get moving on this journey.
The good thing about using live Slido while you do these panels is it's incredibly distracting from the panelists because they can't really see the answers and we're constantly glancing back. Jim, without looking, without cheating.
Okay.
Where do you see AI projects failing or going back to trial and proof of concept or redesign? What are the key barriers that you identify?
Again, I think we're probably doing ourselves a disservice by when we say AI, what does it mean? It's so broad.
Yeah, the definition.
The definition is so broad. I mean, if you just take a poll in this room, how many people started with ChatGPT and then went to Claude, and now I'm using Gemini because the models continue to improve and change consistently, constantly, right? This one's better, this one's better. No, now I'll use this. And I know that's a consumer experience. When you think about the upmarket enterprise, they're gonna go make their investment. They have the skilled people, they have the resources to be able to create the tool that they want, build it how they want inside of the platforms that they're looking to leverage and use. But when you get into mid-market, when you get into the other segments, I bought my Google Gemini enterprise license. That's what I'm going to go forward with. How do I build the tools that are going to connect into that? It starts to become, I think, the integration point that customers are looking for. And that integration point is, one, I got to make the choice of which one we're going to go forward with. Two, all of these ancillary tools that I have, how are they ultimately going to connect and be supportive so that it's actually beneficial to do it? So I think where it all comes from, I did cheat. I saw the customer trust. I think people, we're having lots of conversations around data sovereignty, what that looks like in not just the UK, but many countries around the world right now. I think that's going to be a continued topic of conversation. Where does it go? And then how do I build those workflows and I'm knowing that I'm making that right choice with everything that interacts with my business? So I think there's some support side of it internally that people are scrambling around. Finance has a project, IT has a project, somebody else has a project as well.
I'm immediately interested by the findings here. So obviously customer trust has come up on top, and immediately I've realized there's a flaw with my own research. So my interesting point on that would that be customer trust from a contact center perspective, or are we talking about consumer trust of AI products? Because, I mean, at Cavell, we've done research in the past, and actually, as soon as consumers have an urgent or emergency issue, their willingness to talk to an automated system, whether it's AI-enabled or not, falls dramatically. So, first of all, do you agree that there's a sort of distinction between customer trust on the part of the contact center manager and then also on the consumer side? Jim, I might come back to you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's vital. We hear it. Everybody hears it. They'll get on a phone call and they'll prompt to say, "Hey, prove to me you're not AI," right? If they're actually getting on a phone call and a conversation that's happening. That is where that trust is starting to build. There's people who want to have that personal interaction. There's people who want to have that, don't mind that it's an interaction that is with an AI agent, as long as I don't have to be penalized with my time or my frustration with how that experience ultimately goes. And then I think people will always have that conversation about what happens to my data. I think mostly on the consumer side, when they're calling a business, I do think for the most part, they trust the companies that they're calling, that you're doing right by the data, how we're engaging, how we're interacting. So I think it's more of the initial conversation that people are wanting to get into, that's where they're questioning if they're losing a human feel at any point.
Yeah, and in the research that we did, it wasn't just imminency and sort of emergency. There was also empathy as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you're calling up a funeral home, awful morbid example for me to use on the panel, but
it's a good one,
you're not really going to want to speak to an automated system. You're going to want to speak to a person. The data overwhelmingly shows that. Maybe in 30 years, maybe slightly different. Steve, from the 5/9 perspective, how do you overcome both the maybe reticence in both contact center buyers, but also their consumers? How do you help them overlay some of those concerns?
Well, I think I'd just like to come back on the trust bit.
Of course.
I see 4 pillars. One is the customer. You pointed out the employees. Your own survey research says that, yes, their employees are worried about AI
agents,
for their
definitely.
job. Exactly, the agents. But at the same time, they're prepared to be there to govern and to help create better agents for the workforce. Now that then points to your second point about internal skills. We do have a training gap, and so we need to build on that as an industry, not just as a company. And then there's the business has to trust the models that have been created. The DPD brand disaster in their automated chatbot. And the final one is, I think, is really important, is that the company has to trust the suppliers, and that's on the technology providers and also the partners. Everyone, they have to trust that you're going to come through with the use cases, going to come through with suggested outcomes. I mean, again, I've seen research that says most companies of all sizes need help. Even those large ones that are going it alone still need help from third-party organizations to build out these pieces. And so then, the products that come through, things like trust and governance, they need to trust their suppliers. And I think that's a really important element of that. So if you put all those together, then I think you can start creating the use cases, the scenarios, the outcomes, and the case studies are gold. It is sometimes difficult to get one of your customers to do a case study because they think, we have some competitive advantage here over our other competitors. But those are gold, to have the practical, this is how it happens, this is the practical AI element.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. Matt, consumer, customer reticence, how do you sort of help them overcome that?
Well, I mean, I was actually thinking about it when Jim was kind of talking about the positioning of this. I actually think there is an education challenge. There is a training challenge, but I actually also think there's an education challenge. And I think that education challenge has got two sides to the coin. I mean, how many people in the audience have had a CEO walk in and go, we're going to use AI and we're going to take 30% costs out of this specific capability because he's read somewhere on some LinkedIn post that it's completely feasible and completely possible. I think there's a C-level education gap that we have to close around how we responsibly use these tools without sacrificing CX. And I think that's really important. But conversely, and I said the kind of two sides to the coin, the other side to that coin is it doesn't have to take years and months, right? We can and do have the ability to make these improvements really quickly. I just think the opportunity to take people, and that's our consumers and our staff and our C-suite, on that journey with us. You know, if I kind of ask anybody in the room, if you ran the London Marathon, the first race you ran was not the marathon. You probably started by running a 5K and went, I can run a 5K, and then you ran a 10K, right? What we're trying to do with some of our clients and some of our customers is take them straight from a couch to a marathon. We're not letting them build trust in the usage and educating them along that journey. And I think that's something that we all need to be doing to make this land effectively, right?
We've got a couple of minutes left. One of the things that I've been saying for years, and whether I'm right or wrong, that the sort of contact center, anyway, within the communication SaaS sphere, seems to be sort of the bastion of using AI. And the reason I've always said that is because it has the most complex problems in it, and we've never been able to solve them in a lot of ways. So actually, as a new emerging technology appears, it gives you an option of solving a problem that you previously could never have done. Is that true? What proportion of the AI deployments that you're helping customers with are either improving existing processes or actually helping them solve something that they've never been able to even look at before, because now you can do, translation and sentiment analysis across different countries? I'm interested to see what's new and emerging and what is just we're desperate to improve our own internal process. Steve, I might come to you first on that. How does that break down?
Yeah, I really feel that it's the data, it's the gold, the fact that we can surface that on a daily basis. This is really, uncovering information that companies didn't know about. I mean, if I can just use Anglian Windows, one of our customers, as an example, they had no idea that the scaffolding was remaining up on the front of their house, and that was causing complaints. Customers were calling in to say, well, when are you going to take it down? I've got these nice new windows. I want to show my neighbours off. I'll show off my windows to my neighbours. They had no idea it was an issue. And so what came out of that was obviously a change in process, so they ensured that the scaffolding came down sooner. The list goes on. You find this information. That does change process, but it can also change near-term outcomes as well. So I think it's for me, it starts there. And unless you do the analysis, it's all going to be just a guesswork. An assumption.
Yeah, it's either guesswork or assumption, or you're just trying to do something that you think is a problem, but as we said before, you might have perceived it wrong. Matt, what proportion roughly do you think is sort of new bleeding edge use case, or just trying to sort existing process?
I mean, again, without being contrary just for the sake of it, there were kind of two phrases that you used there. The one was never being able to solve, and I'd argue that we've seen in the history in contact centers, it is solvable. It just needs an army of people to solve because it's complex and it takes a long time. The reason I make that point is, what does AI give us now? It gives us the ability to supercharge those actual contact center agents that we have got without having to multiply 10-fold or 20-fold. Right? The ability to actually do quick triage, the ability to do a huge amount of deflection, the ability to, all of those topics, right? So I think never is probably the wrong word, but what we are seeing is that front end of the contact center environment, that first call deflection, making sure that by the time an agent reads it, they've got the right context, they've got the right knowledge articles sourced and surfaced to them, etc. I think that's probably really important for us to think about. And the other one that we were thinking about in terms of usage and where we're seeing the value come from, in the enterprise space, we're seeing huge value actually come from that voice, the agentic voice experience. And for me, when we see local councils adopt it, and when we see kind of local police forces adopt it, you know that there's enough of a trust in the market that actually it's
Hugely
happening.
regulated industries, you know,
Highly
massive
regulated,
customer
insurance,
data, yeah.
financial services, exactly, right? So, you know, kind of if you think about those two bookends, there's real value that we're doing, and essentially all we're doing is hoping to allow you to get through a higher volume in a better way with the teams that you've already got and managing your way through that as an outcome.
Excellent. Jim, I'll leave you with the final word on that. How much do you think DARPad is sort of helping with emerging use cases versus, you know, trying to, customers are coming with existing business processes and wanting AI to fix something that already exists?
I think more often than not, we see the conversation start with operational efficiency improvements. That's where it goes. Where the agentic workflows start taking hold and where they start building and getting more creative is new routes to market, new initiatives, things that they never thought that they could do before. And that's always been a priority in a business. How do we go evolve? It goes back to your data conversation. Now the data tells us more. We can have a new evolution, and that's ultimately where they get most excited about it.
Excellent. I really hope that was interesting for everyone in the audience. I think AI obviously is a really key part of the contact center, and I think it's going to continue to be going forward. All of the panelists will be around for the rest of the day, so if you've got any burning AI questions, I would recommend finding them. But I just wanted to say a massive thank you and a round of applause to Matt Cook from PwC, Steve Blood from Five9, and Jim McGarry from DialPad.
Thanks all.
Gents, if I can invite you to leave.
Absolutely.